Hello and welcome. So let's just check. Oh, I know what I've not done. Have I? Nope. I have to put the iOS camera on every time, and every time I forget to mute that particular mic. So muted, we're here. Wow, everybody, another month has flown past. I can't believe it, but it's great to have you all here. I've seen Norm and Digger in chat, and also Timber might be around somewhere. Oh, there he is, just arrived. So thank you to those three because they're my moderators. If you do anything naughty, they will stop you. Just to warn you. Not that you were planning to be naughty, I know, on this lovely Sunday. I don't know about you, but it's been really sunny the last couple of weeks, very dry, which is unusual for the UK. And it's just gone cold today. Out came the winter coat again. And I had to laugh. John, I'm going to out you, because John said, was it a special occasion because your hair's down? And I don't see it down very often. And I'm like, no, it's just Sunday. I wash my hair on Sunday. It tends to be down for the day I wash it, maybe, and then it goes back up. And if I'm modelling in the afternoon, it will take out entire models. It will soak up whole cups of tea. So it generally goes up in a ponytail to stop it from causing any damage. Wow, so who's snuck in? John, I just saw arrive. Oh, no, I think everybody else I've already said hello to on chat. So great to have you all. This week, we are going to be talking about painting minis. Not because we haven't talked about it before, but because it's all I've done modelling wise. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, I've been doing Scut City, which is the giant sci-fi city. And I've been running an RPG. And I want to sync the two together. And if you were to look at my kitchen, if you go on any of my Patreon only videos or channel member only videos, you'll see it regularly. But if you go on, you can see my kitchen has a massive, sort of it's one of the shelves, like half the shelf with a grid forge base so I can change the tiles in it. And a kind of mock up of what I want the backdrop arrangement to be like, because it's going to have a fully enclosed backdrop. And I've worked out, I'm not quite sure how to get it in there. So it's sitting there while I get around to experimenting because I am in full Kickstarter mode. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a sneak peek of my Kickstarter and what it's looking like so far. Welcome to Go For It Painting. Great to have you here. Stephen's arrived from Scotland. Yeah, I haven't seen you for a while. You've been working nights, haven't you? So, I haven't missed anyone. No, I'm just going to show you this. So this is my latest it's one of the options. There are many options for the latest Kickstarter. So the idea is it's the training ground. There are damaged buildings. You can also get them in plain concrete, which just has a slight pattern on the side. And I think a slight pattern, like a concrete texture, is always really useful for hiding layer lines because it just stops the sort of maybe slight rippling you get quite often on a smooth one. But there is also a completely plain smooth one. And the idea is that you can just pop out into these. This is the worst one because it's a door and it's got two ridges and you need to make sure you get the right ridges in. There we go, and they just click in. That doesn't click as much because it's a bit bendier, but you've got a window, you can just click in and you can hear it clicks. And then yeah, it didn't click because I didn't get the right bit in. Oh, there we go. And then these go on top. And you can see, whoops, they're just held by little bit gravity, really. This is a smooth top, but if I show you this top, it's got little gravity blocks, so you can just stack them up. And there's also a huge number of clip holes. If you were to look at say this one, you can see there's clip holes in the top here so we can add some stuff in. This has got a shatter point extender so it becomes the right height for shatter point. So that's a 3-inch cube. If I just bring that up, that's a 3-inch cube. If I want to make it shatter point worthy, I can add this on and it's a, oops, that's the wrong way around, no, that's the right way. And it's a shatter point height. It looks quite stark at the moment because I haven't painted up this, but I'm doing it in multicolour, so everything can be printed in different colours. So you have your box as one and your top as another. And the system is in 3 inches because a lot of games have 3-inch cube. So, you know, it's a pain. I don't really like it as a size. I prefer 4-inch, but you know, you can stack them up. It'll look really good. You'll be able to do walkways between things so you can come in and out. Really looking forward to how it's going to look. And I just thought to myself, forgot to do the concrete and damage texture on the window. I just saw it here and I was like, oh, I forgot to do that. So yeah, so I have some work still to do. I've struggled a bit, if I'm honest, to find a system that would allow gravity and clipping and all work and be 3 inches. And this is what I've come up with. What I hope to do is that I can use this same box system in future Kickstarters. So maybe in future, I'm likely to do a market district next. So I could use maybe one of the 6-inch by 3-inch ones, which I'm calling a 2x1, and put in a bigger cutout. It's a mech door. It's like quite a big door. And the shops can just slide in there. So I can do a different exterior on this same base shell. And then they become compatible. So over time, you'll be able to build them up. And this is the 1x1, but I've got every option up to 3x3, which is really a bit big, to be honest. But you can stack on it. So you could put a 1 on it, or a 2x1 or a 3x1. So you can create loads of things. And that's where I am anyway. That's where I've got to. The buildings. Something wasn't very manifold earlier and I'd had a couple of filled in clip holes. So I spent half the afternoon fiddling that and putting a couple of just tweaks from all the test prints. Tweaking before I get too far down. So I've done some tweaks and I've got 2 more sets of buildings to finish. And then I'm onto terrain tiles. So that'll be fun. So there we go. That is my latest Kickstarter, and I will do a little peek at the end for those people who do the end rather than the beginning. But I'm hoping it will be really good if you're into skirmish games. But if you're not, it's actually going to be a very flexible system for adding in any building into anywhere. If you want it to be clipped so it's more robust, you can do that. The only ones that won't clip are ones that have got 4 holes on this one particularly. Like there's clips on this side there, but all the clips on these get taken out. So it'll only clip on the one side if you want it clipped. So I think there's a little bit of just, yeah, if you want to be really flexible, it can be a little bit in need of maybe a dab of glue if you're going to do it permanently. I mean, we all glue things and we're very anti it with 3D printing, but you know, it wouldn't take much to put a couple of dabs of glue on if you're worried about it. And yeah, anyway, there we go. There's roofs, there's spacers, there's doors and windows done, and the buildings. And then I've got all the fun bits after this. This will be the backbone of it, and it takes quite a long time because of the damage texture. You know, the concrete's much quicker to do, but this is, you know, you've got to get it lined up. The shatter point extender has to match it. So there's been quite a lot of, a few dead ends I've gone down and come back. But there we go. Very, very happy to at least get it almost there. And very soon I'll start getting the renders, and maybe even, because all the buildings will be done, maybe even paint up a few of them so that I can take some good pictures. So let's go look and see what chat have been up to. Ooh, Stephen's in the doghouse. Nick's come in. Hi, Nick. Obi-Wan's attic. Ooh, that must be a nice place to visit. Hi. I'd say Obi-Wan, just a completely massive aside, went from being, well, you know, he was an okay character to being one of my favourite characters when I watched the Clone Wars. I really quite like his putting up with Anakin. Anyway, hi, Joe21. So Stephen's in the doghouse with Mary. Ooh, I'm sorry, Stephen. But Mary's a good woman. She'll sort you out. Don't worry. And hello, David David Fallis Corso. And Stephen's asking, am I being affected by the bin strike? No, thank goodness. I live 10 miles away from Birmingham. So I'm actually in Solihull. And we privatised our bin service donkeys years ago. And it used to be they wouldn't take anything. You know, if your bin was open half an inch, they wouldn't take it. They rejected my bin so many times. And they were really snotty when they did it. I rang up once to go, why didn't they take my bin? And she goes, oh, you had books in it. And I said, well, I've got old encyclopedias. I looked on the website. Doesn't say they won't take books. And the lady very haughtily told me, you should take them to the charity shop. And I'm like, the charity shop don't want them. They're old encyclopedias. I've already tried. In the end, we took the covers off, put the paper bit in the recycling and the covers in the main bin. But they won't take books, apparently. There we go. But now they're privatised. They take anything. I mean, I see people with whole trees sticking out the top of the green bins and they take those. So it's been a lot better. And that's not a political comment on privatisation versus unionised labour, but they don't strike as much, that's for sure. So yes, but thank you for asking, because just a couple of miles up the road from me, the bins will be piled. The rubbish is piling in the streets. It's horrendous. So yeah. Norm says encyclopedias make good logs for fireplaces. I actually have my one's a World History of Art and the other Jamie Oliver cookbook, because I don't really cook, but they're also very useful for getting your monitors up to the right height, because monitors are generally too low for me. Could actually do with all these being up a couple of inches, I think, but they are where they are. Oh, and I've got rid of them now. I can't use them. So Digger says, his bin chaps are good. They bend the council rules a little. I look after them at Christmas time. That's very good. I don't think they actually... Mum used to always give them a box when I was little, because Boxing Day in the UK is for giving people a tip, which is a box. And she always used to tip the bin men, but I don't think we've done that in the 20 or 30 years. So that's a childhood memory. So I am going to put on the video. I'm going to have to remember to turn the iPhone camera off. Oh, it's good. It's off. It's already off. It remembered. I'm really sorry. I'm actually going to pause it now because I think this is impossibly hard to read and just tell you what that all said. So in case you were desperately trying to read that and I was over it, I'll start it again in a sec. But basically, this is a Star Wars crawl, but way too fast. So it's a long time ago in a workshop far, far away, episode 1, Rise of the Mandos. So it all started with Darkfire Designs creating Mithari March, which is not saying the word Mando because they got flashpoint ceased and desisted, so they're trying to use different words now, and asking for ideas. And I sent Ty, who's the creator at Darkfire, my concept for Vel Burn Bazaar. So this is my wording for him. And it's the Firestarter. He's a martial, family man, pyromaniac. Vel Burn Bazaar is a simple man with a simple pleasure. He loves fire. His signature move is a double flamethrower slow jetpack spin. He even painted his armour in red, orange and black for fire and smoke. Of course, if you ask him, he will say they represent justice for his job as a marshal, family for his parents who adopted him when his first family's home was burnt down in the clan wars, and lust for life. Sheshoy, that good old orange Mandalorian armour colour. So, if you don't know, armour colours in Mandalorians generally have a meaning coming out of a set of books which are difficult books to read. I'm just going to put it out there. They cause a lot of controversy. They're quite extreme, really, in their views that the Jedi deserve to be slaughtered. Nobody deserves to be slaughtered, no matter how bad they are. And I don't think the Jedi are ever bad. So anyway, the good news is Ty did a whole month of Mandos. So there were about 20 odd of them because it was working days. And they all came out and I printed them all and I painted exactly 4. The 2 Mandos, the Mando I had came in, actually I painted more than that, came in 2 options, one with 1 flamethrower and one with 2 flamethrowers. And I had a FEP leak, so the first set failed quite a bit. So I then reprinted them, but actually then found that it was a huge amount on that build plate and the Mandos were on the side that had printed better. Thankfully, the FEP leak didn't damage the printer at all. So I've just swapped the FEP and keep printing. So I printed about 50 odd Mandos because there's also last March 23's Mandos, Mando March. So I've got a lot of Mandalorians sitting around and whether they ever get painted or not, time will tell. But anyway, I wanted to paint up this one. There was also another one that I really liked in Mando March in 2023, and that was the Farmer. And so we're going to see the Firestarter, And then we're also then going to see the farmer, and it became the father, and there's actually 4 of them for that as well, and they're again by Ty. And the idea is that he's a man on a mission, and the mission is quite obvious in it. It's a very much a story in those. But for these, I wanted to practice painting flames. I'm actually going to move myself. Oops, no, it's that. I'm going to move me. Because I think actually up here is the safest place to be. What do you think? I'll put myself over there. And I won't appear as much in the way. There we go. So this is basically how I painted them. The first big challenge, which actually took me half a day, was getting all the right helmets and all the right Mandos. Even though I'd printed them maybe 8 or 10 at a time, or maybe more, I had some misprints and failed prints from the first set. This is 2 plates, so I had a lot of doubles. I had to stick all the heads on and make sure they all went on the right Mandos. And then I ended up reprinting the extra heads, and I've still got a pile of Mandos to add more heads to from the reprints. 1 or 2 of them had print fails, they needed an extra support. So he ended up with like 100 heads and little men or women to stick them onto, or others for those alien species that aren't actually, one gender or 2 genders or 3 or 4 genders. So my first case was just trying to work out what head, because some of them are specifically designed. So like the flamethrower is a basic Mando helmet, and they always have the T visor. That's how you tell them. But some of the others have got specific heads that fit on. Like the twins fit together, and their Leku, because they're Twi'lek, actually do bend around each other. So there we go. Movie time, says Norm. Obi-Wan's Attic. I'm catching up with the Clone Wars. I've never actually watched, but always loved Alec Guinness as a kid and began to appreciate McGregor's role. I have to say the Ewan McGregor version I didn't really like so much in the movies. His fake beard is very fake, but I really like the animated version. I think his hair looks better in it as well. And I loved Alec Guinness as a kid, Kind Hearts and Coronets. He did some Passport to Pimlico, all those sorts of ones. He did some really good movies. He was a really gifted actor. So he was good. Stating's gone off for a cup of tea. Hi Joelle, great to have you there, nice to see you come across the channel. Lamoche. So Rolando Ratas, are these Star Wars minis? Yep, they are. So they're based on Mandalorians, which I guess up until The Mandalorian were probably one of the less known of the main movies. You knew Boba Fett, and he was a Mandalorian, and nobody really knew much about that. But there were some books then written, and they've been in a few of the comics. I really like the Jango, I don't really do comics, but I really like the Jango Fett Open Seasons comics. And they have a really tragic story to the whole Mandalorian sort of story, with their planet being burnt off many times. So, but they were also, if you go back in time, one of the oldest enemies of the Republic, and they had a different sort of armour then. So they've been around a long time now, and they've been sort of in the expanded universe, and they've been growing and growing. So actually there's a lot of things you can draw from for Mandalorians, depending which era you're drawing from, and depending which view you have, whether you tend to go with the modern The Mandalorian, or you tend to go back to the old expanded universe Legends Mandalorians, or, but anyway, they're very much a Star Wars staple. So yeah, and very, very obviously. Oh, Staten's back, he's had his coffee. So Norm is understandable. And Go For It says, don't forget to hit the like button. So please do, yes, it's always good to get likes. 17 likes, 26 viewers, so that's doing well. And Rolando, I even liked the Book of Boba Fett on Disney. So I was never a huge Boba Fett fan. This is before the series came out, in that I didn't really, one bounty hunter didn't really affect me much, and the original trilogy are not my favourite trilogy. In fact, none of the movies are my favourites in Star Wars. I prefer their animation. If I could say, Star Wars animation to me is its best. Hang on, I'm just going to have to pause the movie. So, because that really went past too fast on, let me just play this again and then pause it in a sec. So, here we go. I'm a huge fan of their sort of animation, and I liked Boba Fett because I didn't have an idea of what I wanted in a Boba Fett series. but I liked it better when Mando was in it, and I felt that it was very disjointed because Boba Fett, I felt like it was done as dirty by Mando appearing in his series. It was just like, he was in too much for it, and I really feel like it should have been in the main Mandalorian series, perhaps. Anyway, so I'm doing flamethrowers, and I wanted to show off my arcs that I did, and I have done a video on this, so you'll be able to go and look at it on YouTube if you're that interested. And these arcs, the smoke on these has been done with clear resin, because at the time I was printing in clear resin, and I do like printing in clear generally, because A, you can see stuff at the bottom of the vat, and B, if you want to do clear, it's already baked in. But it does bloom a little, and it's not as crisp on detail. So I've now been doing this nylon black, actually, which Clement Flash, Craig, recommended. And so I've been using that, and it's a nice resin. It does well. I also use fast navy grey on my other printer. But the clear comes out with a really nice smoke effect, because you can get this sort of translucent effect you can just see here. And then I just dry brushed a bit of sort of pale grey over it. It came out really, really well. I would be tempted, and I've still got my Mars loaded up with clear for this very reason. Not that I use it particularly. Now I've got a new resin printer. I've got a Saturn 4S 4 Ultra as well. So I wonder whether, if I was to do this in future, I would go back and reprint some bits that are separate, like maybe those bases in clear, just to get some good effects. So if you are printing and you've got clear, it is great for doing smoke effects. And there we go. But as I don't have any clear, I've just had to go and paint these white as a starting point, because fire is very bright, so you want to start on a bright base. And grey, or in this instance, it was a white primer, but I didn't put it on particularly heavily. And I also I primed these a minute ago with my airbrush, and I used white and black, I think, for these. I started with black because some of their armour is going to be black, and mostly I will spray paint them with white, and I let some of the white go onto the armour just to lighten it a bit for an OSL effect, but actually that all mostly gets painted over. Good evening, Benjamin. Good to have you here. Right, so I am going to talk a little bit about my various thoughts on painting, just because even if you're doing railways, if you're doing bigger things like this, these are 1/48, so the equivalent of O scale in railways, then there's a number of things that over the years I've painted a lot. And I mean a lot of figures, badly. I am not a great figure painter. I've done some that I really quite like. Generally the larger ones I think are easier to paint, because you can do the eyes, they're fine. You'll see that I really didn't put a lot of effort into the next Mandos that I do. There's actually one little girl in there, and she has a face, and I didn't put a lot of effort into it. And one of the problems that I have is that, faces take a lot of effort, and I was running out of time because I was painting that on the Sunday and it had to be in on the Monday. And they even extended it because I asked them to, because I wanted to paint up the father figure, and it had only come out on the Monday. So you had less than a week to paint it. So anyway, it was worth saying this was for a contest, not because I want to win or anything like that, because quite frankly, I don't really want to make a competition out of my hobby. I've been there with railways, did a lot of quite stuff with the NMRA that was in the competitive realm, and I found it it burnt me out of it, if I'm honest. One of the reasons I stopped doing railways was doing my master model railroader and burning out trying to get everything done. So I'm not a huge fan of doing it, but it is a deadline, and I need a deadline to get anything done. So it was very useful to have that as a deadline, because it actually made me paint these, otherwise they would just still be printed and nothing else. So what I'm doing is I've painted a white base coat on anything that I want to put a colour on. Anything at all that's going to be coloured has got a white, because otherwise it's going over black, and it just takes so many coats to get the oranges and reds to show through. I'm also then going over this just with a dry brush, just so I've got not all black. I mean, it was primed in black, but you can never ever just paint black as black. It's just the wrong colour. it just loses everything. You crash all your shadows. So you need to really start with a dark grey. So you've got somewhere to go if you want to put a wash on to darken it, and you can go a little bit lighter if you need to. It's definitely worth never starting with all black. And I rarely do it. And what I found on these is, because I did black first for a lot of them and then did a white from above, so I got that kind of very classic zenithal highlight. I paint over it mostly, but there's one or two areas where you can see the black really showing through. So chat says the warrior princess with the wolves were very lifelike. Thanks, Stephen. I didn't paint those two warrior princesses, someone else did, so that's good. And I'd like to repaint the wolves a little bit, maybe a bit more, now I've been painting longer. So I'm starting off with a fluorescent yellow. I like using fluorescent paints for doing things like fire. I have no intention of fluorescing these. I don't need them to glow or fluoresce, and you won't see any final photos with a fluorescent on. They just do give you a really vivid, bright, light looking yellow. But the yellow is a little bit too limey to me. It's got a little bit of a green hue. So it's just a starting point. The other thing is I do find fluorescents are very thin paints. It could be I just haven't shaken them enough, and they'll get better as I get down the bottle. But I do find that they're slightly translucent quite often. There's not a lot of pigment in them. So as a result, I sometimes mix them with a yellow or mostly with an orange to just get a little bit of extra thickness and opacity to them. So you can see here I'm just adding little bits at the top. These are the jetpack plumes, and then the rest of them are the flamethrowers. I did actually lose one of the flamethrowers, it came off, so just to warn you that don't hold by the flames. And these are the oranges for the jetpack. Jetpacks are quite hard to do because you actually want a bit of a cone shape, but obviously the smoke hides that. And if they'd done them in clear, you might be able to make something, but you're never going to do it unless you print in two parts and have a sort of clear tail and a sort of an orange cone. So anyway, I'm now dry brushing with orange. There's a lot of that orange there. Annoyingly, I had all these colours. It looked really good. Actually, it wasn't this one. It was on the next one. I forgot to put the lid on my wet palette overnight, so I came down. It was all the father colours. And yeah, they'd all dried up overnight because that's what they do when you don't put the lid on, which was annoying because I then didn't touch up some of the bits that probably needed a slight touch up. But I'm just dry brushing over. And if you look at flamethrowers, they're either completely orange and just not much there, or they're very yellow at the base and they get orange to almost black by the edges, but there's not a lot of smoke coming off them. And I was quite surprised, maybe not, you know, the number of, if you type flamethrower into Google, one of the top ones is a blonde, you know, sort of scantily clad woman practically, not really scantily clad, but a blonde, you know, with her flamethrower, and you're like, oh, marketing. But actually people do buy flamethrowers. I'm not quite sure what people actually want with them, but people do buy flamethrowers. So you can go online and there are people with flamethrowers. So there we go. So yeah, so I used, this is a light orange, and then I will have used a darker orange and gone sort of down, darkening it up over time to try and show, and unlike most things, you normally sort of dry brush lighter and lighter over the top of a model, but with fire you go the other way. You put your light colour on first and you dry brush with a darker colour and a darker colour and a darker colour. And each time you do it, you catch slightly less of it, so you put slightly less of the darker colour on. So these are different colour fluorescents. Norm makes the point, which I'd missed, that flamethrowers are good for the zombie apocalypse, which is coming. Yeah, I'd missed that one. Oh, I watched Electric State a couple of nights ago, which was interesting. I've read, it's by Simon Stallenberg, the original book, Stallenhag, and I've watched Tales from the Loop and I've watched The Electric State, and they're always very quite sad type of stories. I found Tales from the Loop incredibly depressing, the last story especially. And it's interesting to see this kind of dystopian 50s retro futuristic vibe done as a really Netflix, you know, quite a lot of money dropped on it, film. So that was quite interesting. And And then once I'd got those flamethrowers happy, and you can see on my palette, there's a little bit of a dark colour, but it's mostly oranges and there's not a huge amount of the dark colour going on. It was time to paint up the armour. Now I've said black, red and orange for the fire colours and to represent, what was it, justice, family and Sheshoi, the Mandalorian lust for life. But anyway, so I just made up some, and I did, for each variety that I had, like the double flamethrower and the single flamethrower, I did one with a solid coloured armour with reds, and then one with stripes on and edgings in the colours, so it was mostly black. And there really isn't a lot of black, you might say, on the armour of the solid plated ones, but the coat, as they call it, the underclothing, the kind of jumpsuit thing that they wear, also counts in the colours. So often that will be coloured according to whatever they want. So if you were to look at Jango Fett, in the originals he wears pale grey, which is actually for morning, I think. So there we go. Stating the obvious, can you afford the fuel? I guess it depends where you get it from. So yeah. I have to say, I don't do a lot of mini painting nowadays, and I do think it is a skill that you need to practice to get good at it. I think it's easy to get out the practice. One of the problems I find now is, I don't know about you guys, I'm getting older and I've actually got a spot in my right eye. I can't see out the middle of it, and it's a blip on my retina, and I've been going slowly through the system of having scans and stuff, and there's nothing majorly wrong. I'm just very young to be having the eye issues I've got. So it doesn't help that when I'm painting, it's slightly blurry. And I might, if I take my glasses off, it's no better. If I put them on, it's no better. I don't know about you. I have got some magnifying glasses, which I probably could do. But this is less about, is it in focus, and more about the fact that there's a little bit of a blur over the centre when I'm trying to look at it, which does make it quite hard. Yeah. So quite a lot of me painting armour, and for this I think I had about 10.5 hours of footage that I sped up. I am going to do a quick 5-minute video on it as well at some point, but that needs me to have the time to edit it, and I'm also trying to do my KickStarter, and this is where I struggle with modelling, because like most of you, my modelling is relegated to when I'm not working, and when I'm working, although I am creating stuff, it's on a computer. It's only in the week before the Kickstarter goes live that, well, before I need to do the photos and videos, so the week before, that I actually ever get around to painting it. So I try and be better, and I try and get through all my backlog, but somehow, you know, the weekends seem to shoot past, and I still need to do my VAT return, and we've now had a year end for my company, so you know, I've got all sorts of things to do for that instead. I'm just like, okay, that's the weekend gone, and I haven't started it yet. Now, one thing I see a lot of, and I wanted to talk specifically about, is what type of paint should you use? People are always asking, oh, what paint do you use? And I've seen a lot of speed paints recently being the thing. And if you're doing a big army, you want to do a 1,000-point army, or you want to do something that is a very complex item with loads of detail, but more or less all the same colour, then I think speed paints have their place. And if you don't know what a speed paint is, it's something that's come out of, I suspect Games Workshop did it first, but we don't like to buy theirs because it's Games Workshop. So I have some Army Painter speed paints. I think they were called contrast paints when they were Games Workshop. And my Army Painter speed paints, some of them reactivate if they get wet, but the newer ones, they've released a speed paint 2.0, have been a lot better. And what they are is almost a wash, but they're not. They run well. So I used them very recently when I was trying to do the pipe work on my service tunnels, which are red and yellow and then heavily weathered down. And it's easier to get them to run into loads of gaps because they're quite a fluid. They're not a solvent, they're acrylic based, but they're quite a nice fluidity and run to them. And the idea is that you do a good zenithal prime, And what that means is you spray black from below and white from the top front. So you've got shadows in black and highlights in white. And then you put your speed paint over the top. Now, if you just put it on neat, it can be too strong. So you may want to thin it a bit, and they have a speed paint medium for thinning it, or you can just add water. They react slightly differently if you use water to if you use speed paint medium. And you put it over it and it settles. And it doesn't stay on the high points. It doesn't coat them as much because it's quite thin. So your highest points are like a translucent colour of it. And then it pools in your shadows. So your shadows then become very, very saturated with colour. In most shadows, if you were to look, the shadows actually often have a bluish tone. They're often desaturated, which means they're not brightly coloured. If I was to hold my hand like this and look at the underneath, I can't show you because there'll be lights. Let me see if I can do that. If you look at that, let's see if I can angle this in a way that, where's the light coming from? Up there. Right, okay, let's try like that. Okay, so this is in shadow and that isn't. This is bright, this is shadowed, but it's actually getting a bit of light from the screen as well. And it's not highly pink. It's not a high, bright pink colour. But if you were to try and use your speed paint to model that as a shadow, you've got a black shadow on it from the paint. Even if you paint them all white and put speed paints on, you're going to end up with just a very bright pink. So that's where I take my leave of speed paints. I think they're a great base coat, and I often use them for doing the first coat because they put colour on really quickly, they flow nicely, they'll fill everything. But I actually prefer the look of proper paint. These are all my Vallejo paints, and I get them out, and they just give, I think, a nicer mid colour. And then I will paint highlights on if I want to. And I don't paint a lot of highlights, and I certainly don't edge highlight everything. I did spend quite a bit of time on these trying to paint the OSL for the light on by putting on some orange paint where the light might reflect off the flamethrowers onto the shinier armour plates. And again, you can see if you put something anywhere in your life and you put a colour next to something, then it will reflect the colour just from being next to it quite often. And that is what you're trying to catch. But with OSL, unless you're in a dark environment, then the flames aren't going to show up a huge amount. If you were to put a lightsaber by your face, for example, lightsabers being something I painted OSL with, and your lightsaber's here, you'll get a small amount of pink on your face. But if I've already got a lot of light coming down from up there, the lightsaber's not going to add a huge amount on it. If it's dark and I'm sitting there in a room, or like I'm at the end of a corridor and I'm Darth Vader and I suddenly turn on my lightsaber, it's the only light in the room and everything is flooded with a red light. So you have to be looking at where it is you're actually painting your OSL and what the other light conditions are. And to be honest, you're probably only going to see it in the more shadowed areas anyway, or unless it's a really bright light or in something that's reflective. So you'll see it in armour if it's reflective, but you won't necessarily see it on the coarse under suit that they're wearing. So there we go, let's have a look. So Norm says, small production suggestion, once in a while bring the piece up to camera for a close-up. What I will actually do, Norm, when I edit the actual video is I'll crop in and crop down a lot more than it is here. Because it's going to be done again, I had 10.5 hours. I topped and tailed it, and it took all night just to render out. And I was running a bit. I did it on about Friday actually, and I was like, oh, if I don't get it done today, it's not going to get done. So yeah, it's a really good point. And normally what I would do is just crop a lot more than I actually have. So and I've got another shot which when I've muffed a camera by turning the power off before I've stopped the camera, which I did twice in this lot of recordings. I've also got it in a different direction as well, which is a wider shot from the front. And I'll mix in some of those shots as well, so it's not all just from this one thing. But for this, yeah, I think it's a good point. And, I can actually probably, do this as well to bring in. So, because I can make this bigger or smaller. But I would generally always crop down. It's one of the reasons I record in 4K is you can crop a lot of pixels out and it's not a problem. You get all those pixels just cropped. And the other thing that I do have a problem with sometimes is just that I sometimes take them out of camera shot. So if you have a wider camera shot, it's almost always in camera shot. I think because I was in a rush doing these, I wasn't really thinking about filming. I just put the camera on and thought, well, I'll film it and I'll do a couple of quick videos. But yeah, it is. I've also got to work out which ones are in focus quite often. And also there's an awful lot of superfluous stuff here. There's 10.5 hours, which is going to come out at, there's actually 3 projects on this, but it's going to come out as one sort of like 8-minute video, another like 8-minute video, and then maybe a 12-minute video for the last one. But there's only like maybe an hour of footage for that one. So much of the footage gets unused. It's unreal. But because I was doing a live stream, I just left it running as well. So there we go. Digger, no, we're not doing that now you've said it. Actually, you can't just bring it up to a close-up because this is on manual focus. And the reason it's on manual is otherwise it hunts back and forth when you move your hand or it focuses incorrectly. Oh, this is one where I managed to muff the turning it off, or I turned it off in the wall before not realising the cameras were running on, perhaps. Something like that. Or I just didn't turn the other camera on. So you can see this is the other view that I have, and it's useful for a long shot and to show the palette. So I'll probably, this is very sped up. I probably won't speed them up too much at all in the actual 5-minute one. I'll just do a little close-up of it and a short shot, maybe a few seconds of each of them, but not at sped up. Timber Surf, bit late as it's pre-recorded, but good point for the future. Yeah, but this is the raw footage, and even I can crop in super large on a lot of this as long as it's in focus, which hopefully it is. I've got it on focus on my little monitor, so I can check the focus. So yeah, but it is a point. I knew it was quite wide, and that was mostly just about keeping it in camera shot and getting it going. And then I've got long shots like this. But yeah, you can fill the screen quite a lot more. Norm, you could do a still shot insert afterwards. I can just crop it, guys. King Fox says, looking good, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it is small. This is the thing. Sometimes it's a real struggle. I've got projects that are so large they don't fit on the workbench, and then things like this that are really small. And I use the same camera setup for all of them. I normally would have zoomed it in, but actually I think at one point on one of them I am zoomed in a bit more, and then it's off camera for half of what I'm doing, because I pick it up to work on it and then put it back down, and then pick it up and put it back down. So there we go. It's really hard finding the right middling, but recording in 4K, and I do put it up in 4K, but you can crop to almost a quarter, an eighth of that sometimes, and as long as your focus works, actually it comes out all right in the real thing. It's interesting that, especially if there's a bit of action, people don't notice that much. Jeffrey Keeper, hi Jeffrey, just jumping in with a question. How long do you manage to keep your brushes for? Not long. I almost ruined this one doing all of these. It was splitting by the end, which was annoying. But these are Dale Rowney 10/0 liners, I think. They've got a nice long bit of brush on them, so they can hold quite a bit of paint, but they do come to a nice tip. So I generally paint 90% of small stuff with them, and I do like them. I do like them a lot. But I've got some bigger ones when I need to fill out bigger areas, obviously. This is Tamiya Panel Line Accent Colour, which is basically an enamel wash, and it comes with a very handy Very, very handy little brush thing. It's very easy to use. I use it a lot. I've got 4 or 5 of their colours. I use their brown quite a bit on the father, and we'll get there in a minute. I did actually manage to get some of the black onto the flamethrower, which was really frustrating when I did the hand on one of them. I think maybe on a couple of them. But what's really useful is that a bit of white spirit will take it off, and because the layer beneath is acrylic, it didn't actually take the acrylic off. So I didn't need to worry too much about it. And actually, smoke being what it is, and these being flamethrowers, it wasn't too bad. So I'm going over this at the moment to, I remember I've dry brushed these up to a mid-grey in places. And I'm going over everything with this to bring out the amazing detail that Ty has spent a lot of time putting into the models. I mean, you could probably blow these up 300, 400, 500% and they'd still look really good. And I'm also doing the tea with it and a few other things just to get everything to just settle down a bit. I do believe that paints always look better with a little bit of a wash over the top to settle them down. Rolando, have you ever done a big Warhammer Fantasy or Warhammer The Old World Big Terrain project? I don't like Warhammer. I really don't like Warhammer. I've been to Games Workshop in Nottingham. They do some great modelling, but I just don't like Warhammer. I don't like the skulls everywhere. I don't like the aesthetic. I really don't like grimdark. But I do not need a skull on my crotch. There's skulls on their boots. There's skulls on their this. It's over detailed. If I had to pick a sort of a style that I like, this is me getting off that was me in shot trying to get off my white spirit to get off the enamel where I'd put it where I didn't want it. But no, I really don't like the aesthetic. I'm not a huge fan of over stylized painting. So if I use a speed paint, I will go over the highlights that it reveals with another colour sometimes. And I noticed on Sarastos, did I just say that wrong? Don Sarastos, who I follow on Instagram, he does a lot with painting, does some beautiful stuff, and he did a Warhammer one recently. And he will start with speed paints, and then he paints, I notice, his highlights over the top with a light colour. And I think a lot of people are starting to do that, is they start with something like speed paint to do the base coat, and then they paint over the highlights with a light solid colour that makes them look less translucent and more real somehow. And then I will always put a wash on everything. Always put a wash on everything. It just settles into all the gaps. It rounds out any issues with your paint sort of lines not being quite up to the edges of things. It will sort that out. But no, I haven't. I have done a lot of terrain that you could use for Warhammer, but when I'm designing now, I prefer a harder sci-fi. So these I was showing earlier are definitely on the hard sci-fi. I like the sort of Star Wars Western sci-fi type of feel. I love the hard sci-fi of The Expanse, something like that. I like the Battlestar. I've just finished watching the remake of Battlestar Galactica. You know, that sort of worn, old, new, retro, futuristic kind of look I can go with. But fantasy sci-fi, I sometimes just get a bit like, yeah. So there we are. That's me on Warhammer. Great respect for everybody who does it. You know, it's a massive thing. But I also think they're too dominant in the marketplace, and they're not necessarily a really great company to be that dominant. This is me trying to put some OSL on. Now, if you don't know what OSL is, Object Source Lighting. And what you'd normally do is put a bit of white on and then go over the white, sometimes with an airbrush, with a colour, if you want to do it over something like black, so that you have the light value there. I'm not going heavy for the OSL, so what I'm doing is I'm sort of almost catching the edges nearest the flamethrower with a little bit of orange. It's got a bit of fluorescent in it. It's quite a bright orange, and it's going over the red areas and the edges of the blacks on the armour, and then sort of building it up on some of the flatter areas just a little bit to try and put just a bit of sort of a hint that the fire has reflected on the armour. To be honest, with the armour being red and orange, I don't think it really shows up that much. Even on the black and red ones, I think it's a really subtle look that just isn't really obvious. But on the other hand, when I see someone using a flamethrower on Google, when I Google it, my first thought isn't, ooh, look at the reflections. Ooh, look at the light on their coat. You know, in fact, I looked and you hardly see any OSL at all with it because the flamethrower is normally out in front of you. This guy's only got it because he's twisting on his jetpacks, and so he's causing the sort of fire to stream around his front. Norm says, I just did an 8 times pitch zoom on my iPad. The minis look really great close up. Thank you. Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to pinch in for you, aren't I, Norm? Yeah, you see what I mean, though. There's enough information in the video that you can get close up with them and it's fine. I really would love to do a full-size cosplay of something like a Mandalorian, but they look so uncomfy. I mean, half the time, like the clones were CGI in the original prequel movies. And I feel that the stormtroopers, I mean, they could hardly see apparently out of the stormtrooper helmets. They just look so uncomfy. I mean, how do you even sit in something that's solid plastic around your sort of like a solid plastic panties? How do you sit in those? It's just weird. So anyway, fair play to anybody who does cosplay these. I think the most I would ever manage is the helmet, just because they are so solid. If you're doing the newer Mandalorians, they do seem to wear sort of plates. Like Mando himself started off with less, and it was more just plates over the top. Clones and stormtroopers are the worst because they have those full leg things. But yeah. So I've talked about speed paints. One other way that you can use speed paints, and I don't do it that often, but I think would be a really good thing, is to use them almost as a wash. And I'm going to be trying that on the last project you'll see on here is the ROTS diorama, and we'll talk about that when we get there, to not, spoil the surprise. But anyway, and give me something to talk about when we get there. But I'm thinking of using speed paints as almost washes in those instances, because for that I'm actually going to be doing a Varactyl, which is a Boga the Varactyl from the wheel bike scene. And, for that I feel that, yeah, that would be quite useful. Here, I'm actually going over the jetpacks with a graphite. That was a graphite pigment, and it gives them a metallic look without being too sort of shiny. Just a sort of slight metallic sheen to them. I didn't varnish these as a result because I'd done that. I did varnish the farmer, and I used my matte lacquers over the top because it was painted in acrylics, so going over it with lacquer is a very valid thing to do. But it didn't look that matte, so actually he looks as shiny afterwards as he did before. So I'm a little disappointed. I need to think about what I do about that. But I think there's a thing was I'm not going to be using these to play with. They're on jetpacks and they're not the easiest things. So I'm not going to varnish them. If I was playing with these on tabletop, I would definitely be putting a varnish over the top because they need it. So here we go. Here are the close-ups. And these are great models. My painting is not that amazing, really. What I'm doing is bringing out the details that are already there from what Ty has modelled in. And that just shows you that when you're doing minis, having a great mini is such a godsend when you actually want to paint them. So here we go. I like how the flamethrowers came out in the end. I think they've captured that flame going from pale and bright to a sort of darker effect. A lot of people I know who've painted them painted everything very black. The flamethrowers are very black. The stuff that they're sort of flying up on the jet fumes are very black, and they end up as a very black mini. And I've seen several people do that, and I'm like, I almost think of them being quite white or clear, just not really smoky. So anyway, that was my first one. The next one is also one. It's the father, and I've touched on him. And this is the wording that came with it. So it's, I may look like a simple farmer, but my wife is Miss Fari. This is Mando, but renamed for copyright reasons. And has taught me many skills. Skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. If you let my child go now, that'll be the end of it. I will not look for you and I will not pursue you. Ooh, scary farmer. So the farmer was married to a Mando and they lived a simple yet fruitful life. And she taught him some of her traditions. One day, lizard slavers came, killed her. Well, she's the Mando. Someone said, how do they kill her if she's a Mando? Well, she's also a farmer and she was out in the field and she was a long way from her armour because you don't wear your armour when you're doing farming. And they sniped her. That's what I'm going with. Anyway, and they stole the child. The farmer donned his wife's armour, swore a pact under the ancient Mithari spirits and hunted the lizards down. This is the story of the hunt. Well, there we go. That's the kind of the opening call for this section, which is quite fun, really. I really like this set. It tells a story, and I always think if you can do an emotional story with your models, that's a good thing. So just like with the other ones, I've started with airbrushing them into colours. For these, I'm spraying the bases in mostly brown and black, but then I realised I was one base short, so the white one is one that I'd sprayed up for another Mando when I did the first batch. And these ones, I haven't glued the men on, but I have glued their helmets on because the helmets were separate. And I'm just trying them on the bases to make sure the helmets are looking in the right direction. I'm not quite sure I got this guy in the right place in the end, but anyway, yeah, there we go. He's there. And so there's 4 Mandos. There's the first one where he's standing there looking at the doll from his daughter, child, because Mandalorians don't have a gendered language. It would never be the father, it would just be the parent. The second one, he's leaping over something. The third one, he's got a Trandoshan slaver that he's already hacked his sort of front of his armour to pieces, but no hacking of the actual Trandoshan, and he's sort of drowning in the mud and looking a bit. And then the last one is him and his daughter, hand in hand. It's very sweet. So there we go. And there's an awful lot of me trying to find how actually the rifle, which came off, it printed in one piece and then just came off when I took the supports off, where that went and what was the best way for it to look. In fact, you'll see there's a lot of me trying to work out which helmets went on in a similar way. So Stephen Cameron says, spare a thought for poor Carrie Fisher. That rubber suit must have been horrendous. Which rubber suit did she wear? Okay. Anyway, I thought, yeah, Norm, I know you preferred Carrie as Jabba's slave. I remember Natalie Portman saying how horrible it was working for Star Wars because she wasn't allowed to wear underwear and her white outfit or any of this sort of stuff, and she just thought it was a bit weird. I don't think she liked George Lucas. Let's just put it that way by the end. So I've done this with brown primer. I have 5 or 6 brown primer colours: white, grey, pink, brown, black. Yeah, so that's 5. And I really tend to use the brown when I'm going to be painting something brown, the black when I'm painting something black like the armour, the white if I'm going to do speed paints, the grey if I'm doing vehicles, and the pink if I'm doing yellows or reds, because it's a really great base. Oh, okay, now I probably need to shrink this back down because he's off screen. And there we go. Just shrink that back to fit. Technically. Yeah. This is a prime example where I could have done with a wider shot because he's off screen a lot. Not this one so much, but when I'm doing Boga, you can see Boga upside down there. She's a little bit of a way in. So these were painted a little bit later. So we'll see Boga be unpainted and then repainted again in a minute. And this is a bit of pink because I had the pink out for Boga's mouth. So I thought, well, I may as well use it on the girl at this point. So she got a pink top. I realised just as I'd sort of posted the final pictures that actually the thing that I wasn't quite sure was maybe a print error actually was a torn sleeve, and that I should have painted the bit underneath her flesh tone. But by that point I'm like, it was just a double layer dress and they'd torn the outer layer, or tunic. So Stephen says it was in the original movie A New Hope. I don't remember in a rubber suit at all. So, oh well. Yeah, rubber's hot, not good. So there's, I'm just trying to make this match the others. They're all going to have a similar set of colours on. I'm using Vallejo here because I've got a lot of Vallejo colours. I used to work next door to somewhere that sold Vallejo, so I'd pop in and get a couple of colours at a lunchtime or something. It was very useful. It's my favourite brush painting colour, not because AK, MIG and who are the other ones? AK and MIG really aren't that great, but more just because I use this one a lot. Army paint I haven't got any army paint or normal paints to compare. It's just this is the one I started with. I started back before all of those other lines brought out their other lines. So there was really only Vallejo when I started doing these types of paints, and everything else has come along since, but I've still got the paints, which shows you how long they can last. I had a Tamiya one the other day I was using. It was a clear, and I looked at it and thought I've probably had this 20 years. And there we go. So here I'm painting the mid-tone colour. When I paint these, I paint maybe the colour I want on the highlights, if I'm just going to put washes on. So if I'm not going to put a highlight on, which I don't always do, I'll paint the colour I want for the highlights. If I'm going to go all out and do a highlight stage and a wash stage or a dark shadow stage, sometimes if you're painting like Carmesan clones don't necessarily have a lot of depth to them. Sometimes you want to manually bring that out because it's a tabletop mini to show the ripples, folds in their little skirts far more than perhaps it warrants, but you do that, and I'll paint those then with sort of 3 or 4 colours of the different tones. But for this, I'm just using a fairly thin colour, going over and painting everything. And they're all the same. He's going to be in browns, just various different browns. You saw I'd picked out 4 there. And I'm just putting them on, making sure that I do each one with the same colours. The first one, which was done in 2023, actually has a slightly different outfit. He got changed, when he put the armour on a little bit more. So it's a slightly different outfit. Stephen says, you're more sensible than me. When I'm doing anything messy, I look at my filthy hands and think, I'd better put gloves on. This is 10.5 hours of sweating in gloves. Oof, no. Hi Ed, nice to have you. So we are, just to recap, this is a Mandalorian, it's a story, there are 4 figures for the story, and I'm painting them using Vallejo, which I've thinned. One of the top tips I would give you if you're painting minis and you're new to it, always thin your paints down a bit. They're too thick out the bottle, unless you've not shaken them properly. They're too thick out the bottle and they'll leave lines. The biggest problem is something like a white, and I actually left some lines I think on the girl's face. Even though I'd thinned the white a bit, I hadn't thinned it enough, because you're tempted to try and put light colours on thicker to negate the fact that they're going over a dark colour like the black here, and therefore they need quite a lot of layers. And if you're not careful, you end up with lines, which then when you add washes or when you do close-up photos, you see the lines from the paint and it detracts from the final thing. So it is better, supposedly, to do 2 or 3 coats of a thin one than a thick one. 1 thick coat. But actually, I would say do 1 medium sort of coat that's not thick, not thin, over everything. And then paint your highlights in a also slightly medium toned whatever, and then paint your shadows, and then you've got 3 layers of painting, but you've got some colour in as well. So Ed says, I have some advice for white and yellow if you're interested. That would be good. I mean, yellow, I normally, if I'm doing a yellow, like a complete yellow vehicle, and I'm painting it with my airbrush, I'll paint with a pink primer. And that's the main advice I have for painting yellow, is putting it over pink comes out with a beautifully rich egg yolky yellow quite often, but putting it over grey makes your yellow look a bit greeny. But I don't really have any advice for white, so definitely Ed. Always really keen to learn new tricks. I don't spend as much time watching YouTube videos as I used to, partly because I'm reading instead, and I spent most of my childhood with my nose in a book, and I didn't read for decades, so I've got back into it recently. So that's taking a lot of my time when I could be watching YouTube videos. Mostly Star Wars stuff at the moment. So Ed says, one thing to consider is underpainting. Choose some not white paint that will be a good under the white or yellow. Paint one layer of the other colour, then one 50-50, then one of white. Now that's interesting, especially if you're doing flesh tones or something, which you don't necessarily... I was putting the white down, so when I put the flesh over the top, it looks brighter. But yeah. And then this means you can leave the other colour in the shadows in that other colour, but most of the area will be white. I like that idea. Thank you. And I think definitely when it comes to paint, I notice where I've gone too thick. And I normally will then thin it and just go straight over the top and take it back off again with a bit of thinning. I generally over-thin. I over-thinned his tunic a bit, actually. It does cause me some problems. It was looking very black in a lot of the shadows. And Ed says, I find a light brown makes bandages, cloth, paper look really interesting, and painting pink under yellow really helps it make vibrant. Yeah, I tell you the other thing I learned, and this is for airbrushing, is when you're painting gold, and there's gold speed paint, so you might find this useful if you're painting gold for there. Gold leaf, when they do gold leaf onto a painting or something, normally they'll put red underneath, because then if it shows through anyway, it gives a really nice rich colour. So I've started to paint red under my gold in some instances, and it does come up with a really nice gold colour if you paint red under it. And then Jeffrey in the middle said real paper books. Real paper if I can't get them electronically, mostly a space thing. So I got rid of all my books because I ran out of space, and I wanted to be able to put my dioramas and stuff like that in that room, and I only had one room I could use, and it's where Scut City is now. And then Mum decided to give me a lot of my paper books back as she read them, having thoroughly trashed their spines by folding them in and out. So I'm now starting to get books back of only 2 or 3 authors, perhaps. I've got rid of most of them still. And I got rid of so many books just because, I'm not going to reread them, and just because it was a childhood favourite. And then I ended up rebuying recently a couple of them just because I was like, oh, yeah. The one I just recently read in paper was Han Solo, I remember as a child, and it was really an early Han Solo one, and he was in the corporate sector, which I suspect is where the corporate sector comes from. And it was like him and Chewie just knocking around the galaxy doing stuff. And yeah, I remember really enjoying it, and I reread those recently. I had the Thrawn books, I think, in paper. So what I find is I take paper places, but at night I just prefer reading on a phone because it's brighter. So yeah. I'm reading a lot of fan fiction, which is always online. It's not in paper anyway. Norm says, I really like these khaki colours. Yeah, he's supposed to be a farmer, and I felt that I wanted the browns. I just felt he would be in browns. And brown is very sort of reliable and farmery and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that will be good. And then, yeah. I couldn't really decide what colour to do for his helmet then. I needed it to contrast nicely with the browns, but I didn't want it to be bright or detract too much. So I went with this. I spent ages mixing this custom blue, and it's blue for reliability, I think. So it's basically, I wanted a navy, but I didn't have a bottle of navy. So I ended up mixing a blue and a sort of grey black to get this kind of sludgy one. And this is the one I lost because I left the lid off the palette overnight. And And I did a little bit of just highlighting with a little bit of a lighter colour of it. But there's actually quite a lot of blue goes on because not on the first one, but on the subsequent ones, he's got knee pads and I didn't do whatever the funny thing on his leg was. I left that in a kind of black. He's got knee pads, braces, which are van braces, and I don't know if he's got elbows. No, he's just got van braces. So he ended up with those being done as well to really show it off. And every time I painted it, I was like, oh, there's another bit. Oh, there's another bit. Oh, there is another bit. There we go. I can see Digger's recommending my book. Thank you, Digger. You're always a great salesperson. I really appreciate it. I kind of like the fact this guy's in full armour. You know, I've just done some full armour Mandalorians, very classic Mandalorians. They've got the breastplates, they've got the back plates, they've got the full thigh and calf at the front. You know, they've got all the sort of whatever the one that does the sort of lower bit is called a Venkabur, is it? They've got shoulder plates of varying different sizes, whereas he's really just got a couple of pieces. And that to me is perhaps more what I would expect a farmer to have. You know, they might have their dad's set or something. I imagine it's an heirloom that's been passed down the family, maybe re-hammered a bit to fit the latest inhabitant. But, you know, it's probably been passed down. They don't need full armour. They're not bounty hunters. They're not doing anything armed. They're just farmers who may occasionally need to put something on to protect themselves from slavers. Not very well here. Or other things. So I feel this one has a real story to it that is not very traditional, but far more likely in real life. And actually, Mandalorians, armour is part of their creed. You know, and you're a Mandalorian because you swear a creed rather than because you live on Mandalore. So he could be anywhere. He could have just gone off to some other planet, or the woman who married him, who was actually the Mandalorian, he's the husband. You know, she could have come from somewhere, met him and settled down there. And she's still Mandalorian because she still follows the creed. And, you know, he could become one very easily just by saying his Veselnari. You know, there's loads of just nice lore about Mandalorians, but it's very accessible for them to be sort of Mandalorian, but not, you know, over-the-top warriors. Norm says that Mandalorians really are very medieval with their armour and helmets. Yeah, I think they're a really interesting sort of society. It's very sort of rough and tumble, a lot of fighting. And one of the problems is if they're not fighting the Republic, which they did for about 1,000 years before, they end up tearing themselves apart and fighting each other. So they haven't ever really been at peace. There's been a lot of civil wars. Yeah. And their 2011 pistols, says Ed. Yeah, they do have a lot of pistols and stuff like that. There's definitely a lot of stuff going on in that. And it makes me laugh because people get really excited about all the armour and I'm just like, it's a gun. Yeah, I can just about tell a blaster rifle from a blaster pistol. I can always remember the DCs and ECs, but, you know, I'm not that excited about guns. I don't like talking about them particularly or spending a lot of time producing one. You will never see me do a cosplay video on the gun that I did. That would end up being something else. I'm not interested in doing them. So yeah, but I like lightsabers by comparison because they're a more elegant weapon, aren't they? More civilized. Hi Monique. Monique, you're in New Zealand. Oh, looking after your parents. Well, I hope you have a nice time there. I hope the weather's good, and it's good to see you, or hear you, or see you on chat. Yeah, I do feel, someone was asking me today, why hadn't I taken my job? I haven't seen them for ages and she's over visiting friends. You know, had I taken the job in London where I was going to be doing the miniature sort of Wonderland equivalent. And I did say, well, you know, it's one of those things where I looked at it and it was going to be abroad a lot. All the supplies were overseas. It was going to be down in London, which is not where I live. And I just looked at my parents, and with hindsight, I'm really glad I didn't take it because I have spent more time going to hospitals with all of the rest of my family than anything else, any other year put together, any other year of my life, like all the other years of my life put together than the last couple of years. And Mum had a new knee in January, and she's still not very mobile. She had quite a lot of years of not walking, so she's been not very mobile. So I've been the only car in the family. She's now thankfully driving again. The only car in the family. You know, if my dad wants to come and visit, he can't drive 3 hours now, so I have to go and pick him up and come back. And it's just suddenly it's like, thank goodness I work for myself, you know, so I can go and do these things. Monique says the weather is great over here. I'm glad to hear that. That's good. Norm says very civilised. Nice clean decapitations. Yes, it's always good when you cauterise a wound with them, even though it isn't always fatal, just depending on, you know, plot armour. So you can see on this there's a really brown theme coming on. So then I got to the Trandoshan, who will be coming up soon. The girl's got a bit of pink and she's getting a few highlights in white just to bring out some sort of edging on her. And the Trandoshan ended up being mostly greens, just to bring out something slightly different from him. Monique, that's why I'm over here, Kathy. Folks are not good. And thanks, Ida, who sent blessings from my mother. Thank you very much. She's a lovely person and been a huge inspiration for me my whole life. So it's just about, you know, helping her through this bit. But it is quite funny. We do snipe at each other sometimes because she doesn't hear what I say. Old age. And she doesn't always put her hearing aids in. So it's very funny. We can have entire conversations where we're talking about different things. And we don't realise. It can be very, very funny. Yeah, so there we go. But thank you very much. And, you know, she is doing well. I'm really pleased. And the guy was really impressed how flexible her knee is. So that's good. So it's all really good. It just takes a bit of time. Now, I was originally going to paint this doll that I'm painting at the moment. It's a night owl doll in that it's got those sort of very Spartan eyes like that the armourer has and the night owls have in Mandalorian sort of mythology, or just in that sort of area. And it features in 3 of the pictures. It's in the first one, it's in on the ground in the big base, and then she's carrying it at the end. But because I'd done him in blue, I didn't necessarily want to pick it out in blue, and I wanted it to be obvious that it was there, that you could see it as a distinct piece rather than it disappearing in. Because I think that first one where he's just looking down at the doll and he hasn't got his daughter is a very emotive picture. In the end, I went with orange. I'm not sure whether I'm happy with the orange. It's got red as a wash later, but you know, it is orange now. It clashes with the pink, so it stands out on that one. And it's a very cute little teddy bear, you know, very cute. Yeah, I just says been there myself. It's hard, and it comes to everybody, I think. You just go through it. I'm very lucky. I'm just around the corner, so it isn't hard for me to pop around and sort stuff. Monique says old age is not much fun for them both. Same as your mum, no doubt. Yeah, and I've noticed my dad as well. It's just one of those things. They're all in their 80s. They're doing so well, so I'm really proud of them. But, you know, my dad's had cancer, and it just takes a lot of time. And I'm really blessed that I'm self-employed, so when I need to give them that time, I can do that. And if I do one less Kickstarter a year, or things take a few weeks longer because I've had to miss so many days taking people to hospitals, well, that's fine. It's just a part of my life, and I'm really happy that I can do that, and I'm not at work as an accountant like I was before, full-time trying to get back from another part of the country to get back down to help them for things. It's just been really good. So yeah, but I totally agree. And for anybody who's getting older, like I creak in places I didn't creak before. It's quite disturbing, really, and I'm only in my 50s. Oh well. So I've painted the mid-tone now. I didn't come back and do any highlights on this, I will admit. But what I did want to do was put some washes on. And I decided to have washes I could control. Now, enamel washes are great. They run everywhere. They go in all the cracks. they look really, really good, but they will run places you don't want them to. Like my flamethrowers earlier, they ran all over my flamethrowers. That wasn't ideal. I ended up with black on a yellow painted area. And maybe I could have put less enamel on. Sometimes they just run and they stream into places you don't want them. So I wanted a little bit more control, and I can get that by using an acrylic wash. Now, a few years ago, I bought some Army Painter washes. And what's good about them is they're quite thick. I wouldn't even call them washes. I'd say actually speed paints are almost thinner than them. And you could use a speed paint as a wash, but they're too saturated. They're gonna, unless you want to bring out a different colour. So I'm gonna probably use them on Boga in maybe a purple over the green to bring out a different set of colours. And I think that will work, hopefully. But when you're doing this, I wasn't sure. So I for the bases, and this is the one I did use enamel washes. And you can see here I'm just dry brushing very quickly a small amount of a colour, of a highlighted colour over the top. I ended up having to totally redo that first base that I did because I kept, the girl came adrift eventually, and I ended up, wow, I got the colouring on that wrong, didn't I? There we go. I didn't cut it too quickly. So I'm using a brown wash here, but it's a bit brown. And when I went to stick on that one, the girl on, she'd come adrift from the dad by that point, and she looked half drunk, so I pulled her off, and I ended up pulling the paint off eventually by the time I pulled the super glue off both of them several times. So I'm using this brown one, which is a really brown. I prefer a raw umber look to a burnt umber look, which is what this is. So I went over it with some black to just tone it down a bit. And the idea is that these are muddy, all except the last one, which, because he's out of that doldrums, that mud, he's now onto something solid rock. But I still needed the colours to tie. So although it's a rocky base, you know, it's got the same colour tones. That's the idea. Stephen says, money comes and goes, but time is something we never get back. Isn't that true? And that's an adage to live by. It really is, because you will never, ever get the time back. Ed says, speed paints and contrast paints are heavy washes with good marketing. Yeah, I think that's a really good way of mentioning them. Yeah, oversaturated heavy washes. So the Army Painters are all tones of brown, more or less. And there's light, there's strong, and there's everything in between from like pale, mid, whatever. But I've also got a purple wash, a blue wash, a red wash, a green wash, a military shader, a flesh wash, which is what I originally bought them for. And I think I've got a mid-brown as well. So I've got some useful colours if you do want to add a bit of colour in with those washes. But what I like about them, if you try doing an enamel wash over a flat panel, it looks awful. It just looks awful because it doesn't sit nicely. If you do these acrylic washes, they can also look awful, but they seem to go over flatter areas a little bit better. I just says, I'm 20 years older than you, but creativity keeps me alive. I think it's very true. If you have something that keeps you going, if you're always motivated, always thinking, then it really gives you an incentive to keep going and doing new things. And I love pushing new things still. So Digger asked Ed, does he use them? And Ed says, the high saturation is what makes them heavy washes. That's what heavy washes are. Just GW made contrast paints and pretended they'd never existed before. Yeah. So it's the saturation for me is in the colour, not in the strength. So, yeah. And Ed says he makes his own washes with inks. I have got some acrylic washes that I've made with inks for terrain. And I use those when I want to do a lot of bulk. I've got so many of these little things I've bought over the years that I'm trying to use up all of these washes. Whether I would rebuy them or not will really depend on how much I've used them. I just says, frankly, I'm not into sci-fi, more into history, but technique tips are always fascinating. Oh yeah, when I was doing railways, I got all my best weathering and that sort of thing from military, because at the time railroads weren't really doing much. Their idea of weathering was a white dry brush, which looked more like seagulls that had diarrhea on some people's stuff, because literally nothing needs a white dry brush. You know, if you're going to do a dry brush, don't do it in white. Do it in the, unless you're dry brushing a clone, do it in a grey at the very brightest, you know, but do it in a lighter colour of whatever it is that you're painting. Don't dry brush in white. It just doesn't look right. So yeah. No, and I think, but yeah, I love looking at other techniques, you know, across all of these things. And one of the reasons I got into terrain was I kept seeing really good techniques in the terrain space. So Monique agrees with Stephen, and who had said that you need to keep, you know, create. No, what did Stephen say? Need to keep the old grey cells busy. Yeah, that's it. Hello, Pharaoh Oliver. Very nice to have you. So Ed says, Digger Evans Model Railway. I have my own channel, so I mention it every so often. I should make a video on how I make washes, cheap, normal, and heavy. You really should, because I think I think I called washes magic in a bottle. I think every single thing you paint should have a wash on it, really, unless it's layer line problems with FDM prints, in which case washes can bring out the layer lines, and I don't always advise them then. But even then, I'm still like to put a light something on, just because I do. So Ed says, for terrain, I use £1 craft paints to make washes. Yeah, I can imagine that. I often just use, nowadays, I'm starting to use artist acrylics quite a lot, but I buy them in quite big things. But I've also got, for the really big stuff, when I was doing my railway, I actually had, I think, some emulsion paints, you know, like house paints. Latex, for if you're American. So there you are. Diggers subdue, you're okay. I do great. Get your point about bird droppings. Yes, yeah. So Ed says, I strongly disagree. Washes are various types of a tool, and you should use whatever tools to give you effect you want the final piece to have. That might include a wash. It might not. That's true. I rarely find a piece that I do that doesn't have a wash if it's a mini. Obviously, if I'm doing terrain, I'm doing a lot of FDM printing, and washes can be a nightmare, so they don't get washed as often. But if I'm doing snow or something like that, no washes. So yeah, it's a very good point that some things washes are good, some things aren't. Sometimes, so if I'm doing a vehicle, sometimes it's not a wash so much as a panel line. And that's what those Tamiya are. And panel lines are very specifically just for the panel lining, and then you take off the extra, and then the flat surface you'll weather in a different way. Monique says, okay team, she has to go. Have a great week everyone. Stay safe too, Monique. Thank you for dropping by. So Pharaoh says, I've mostly shifted away from washes for most of my painting. I started out with them, but as I've improved, the effect they gave wasn't really what I was looking for. I think that's interesting, Pharaoh, and I think you'll see the way I'm using these. These are washes that I'm doing now. So this is a red wash going over the pink thing, and I actually think this was one of the worst ones I did, because I started to drag the wash back off again, and the reason was these are semi-gloss lacquers, and it was beading on the surface of this, just this wash over this. It actually needed, it's good to have glosses when you're doing washes because it sits nicely. So the lacquer paints are generally semi-gloss for that reason, because they're aimed at Gundam. But that particular girl just, I don't know, the wash just went on her in a way it didn't on anything else. So these are the Army Painter washes, and I'm using them thinned over the top to sit into all of the edges and to all of the creases. Instead of painting the shadows, I'm effectively using the wash to put the shadows on. But I think everyone has their own unique style, and that's so. Someone asked about Warhammer earlier, and that was Rolando, wasn't it? And I don't do Warhammer because I don't like it. But the style for Warhammer is very similar. Most people paint Warhammer very, very similar because they all followed the Game Workshop way of doing it. It's what they were brought up with. If you started like model railways, like I did, then I paint figures almost like they're locomotives. I paint them the colour and then I weather them, because that's what I started doing. So I paint them a colour and then I weather them. I don't edge highlight. I don't do fancy things. I've started to do it more and more as I've spent more time on like doing minis, but I'm still nowhere near a figure painter, because actually it's a style that I'm not that keen on in some ways. That over stylized tabletop style isn't mine. I'd rather look for a more photorealistic effect, which I just don't have the skills to do on a mini, photorealism. And actually the minis themselves don't always lend to it. They're sometimes slightly cartoonish anyway, especially if there's something like Warhammer. So I think what's really important is you find your style and stick to it, really. If you want to do a cohesive set of minis, you want them all to be a similar style. If you do some in anime style and some in like, oh, I did this method and some that method, sometimes they can look really jarring and disjointed. So yeah, I think it's good to find your method and stick to it. So I just says, mind you, I'm wondering about Egyptian railways, 1920s, lots of sand. Yes, Egyptian railways would be interesting. I don't know, I've only been on one Egyptian railway, and I did, and this was years ago, it was just after 9/11, so that shows you how long ago. It was the February after. I did Cairo down to Luxor, I think, on the train. It's a while ago. Ed says, I think Fair Oliver hit on a good point. Learning other skills or tools means you don't rely on any one thing and can move between art styles. Yeah, and I like to do things differently. When I'm saying you should have a consistent style, I mean within the same army, or the same diorama, or the same whatever. You know, if I'm painting things and one week I'm doing Gundam, I will paint them a very different way to the following week if I'm doing something that's more fantasy based. So I think it's about painting what looks good for your particular modelling. So almost everything here got a wash, because I'd only done one thin layer of paint at this point, so it was more about adding an extra layer of paint on into those shadows, so it brings out all the detail that's there. So Ed says, my Soviet models for WW2 games are all painted with different paints, different colours, but generally with the same style, and you can't tell them apart. Yeah, I think it's the style that ties things rather than the colours and paints. So yeah, I'm fairly consistent in that I will always generally put a wash on a mini like this, but it's not always the same wash, and it's not always that way. And this is a lot of colours. So there's strong, there's dark. Most of these that are going on are the lighter washes, and I'm using them over the thing that are there to bring out the definition, but they're not a black wash. And I rarely use a black wash. Talking about white dry brushing earlier, my other pet hate is people who put a black wash over everything, because it can look good. You know, black washes can absolutely look good, but sometimes they're too stark, and you're actually better off with a dark grey wash, or so I use Starship Filth, which is an oil wash when I'm doing oil washes, and it's a very, very dark grey, and that's the darkest I go, unless I'm using that Tamiya black for something like black armour that's specifically black, you know, because it's a black armour, so it's I want its lowest point to be a black. But if you're going to try it, try using different colour washes that are not as dark as black, and you might find that things start to look a little bit more realistic if you're not going all the way from white as your highlight down to black on every single figure, but if actually you're more slightly mid-toned. So Stephen says, one of my go-to materials is balsa wood because my dad was an aero modeller. Yeah, we all go back. I find balsa wood annoys me because it's so soft, I dent it by mistake. But yeah, balsa wood's great for anything that's, you know, you just want that wood grain. I've used it quite a bit. This is me trying to put matte varnish on because they were shiny from the enamel wash I put on. I did this enamel wash because I really wasn't happy with how the acrylic wash was sitting, and I wanted to build it up, but it didn't look quite right. So they're now really shiny, to be honest, having been varnished, whereas I don't think they were as shiny as that before. So actually I think this made it shinier. And I don't know if you noticed a minute ago, but I did actually put gloss Tamiya gloss, which I think is a great gloss, on the bases because they're supposed to be muddy, all except the last one that is when he's come out the other side and he's out of the mud. So these are sort of wet mud gloss bases as he's going through. I'm trying to work out where they fit best. So Ed says, my bad habit is mixing black and brown to make my most common wash. Black for the darkness, brown for some warmth. I don't think that's a bad habit. That's a really good habit. I mean, black and white, you can't really mix easily in washes. So, you know, black and brown's a good one. I think I would use more brown if it wasn't that sort of really, look at that, she looks drunk. If it wasn't that really bad brown. Actually, on these, I zapped it. It's super glue, and I've zapped it with activator, so they're zapped. And you can see around the feet, I've got white. It's a really common problem if you use activator with super glue. So I went over that with actually just more of the brown enamel paint. I ummed and ahed about putting mud all over the Mandalorian. If it had been a bigger model or if I'd had more time, I might have. But I decided that he leapt and hit, and the Trandoshan probably had just fallen back in the mud. So they hadn't been grappling in the mud much. That's why they're both relatively clean. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So Pharaoh says he started in Airfix models, haven't done one in quite a while. No, I haven't done Airfix models since I was a teenager. So there we go. There's me just getting rid of the brown, sort of takes out the white crusting you get from activating, which is great for frost actually. Tim's arrived. He's made it home from the Lake District, tuning in for the last half hour. Well, we're just on the father. This is me hair drying it, in case you're wondering what I'm doing. I don't like to get them too hot, but I do like to hair dry them. So there we go. He looks quite shiny. I still think he needs an extra matte bit. Well, you know, and actually the scratch on his helmet is just a scuff because I held it. But as it's got a hair on it, which I didn't notice at the time. But as I decided he would just been through a battle, I thought the scuff would be fine. So there we go. That's the first one. When he's standing there waiting to find his daughter, you know, he's just got her toy, her little very cute Mando toy. Here he is running, action pose. He's really about to jump onto the guy. I did struggle a lot with how the top came out. It just didn't look right. And actually, the best thing I could probably do at this point is to repaint it or something. But not going to happen. So here we are. He's running over the top. I think I almost, I think there are bits I would do differently if I was going to do it again. And one of them was the wash I used over it. I know it just didn't really work. And then I put the enamel wash on, but actually it probably could have done with a bit of a darker brown than that. But it comes out looking quite a reddy colour in the end. This is the Trandoshan getting his comeuppance for stealing the daughter and doing goodness knows what. There we go. Hatchet Man. I quite like the blue. I think it's a good colour for a Mandalorian. I did put a little bit of highlighting on, but not a lot. You can just see it on his shoulder pad there, where I've kind of highlighted. But because they're now so glossy, having had a matte varnish on them, and don't look at the girl's face. She was beaten up by the Trandoshan. It's all just massive swelling and bruising. That's what I'm saying, and I'm sticking to it. But yeah, I really should have redone her face a bit. But I did run out of time, and actually the other two were my main entry. This was just a bit of an extra one. But she's very cute. I do like her. She's very cute. Yeah, and that is a bit of torn sleeve, which I didn't realise at the time. So I probably should have realised that, but I didn't realise it until I was looking at the photos. But he's got so much detail. He's a joy to paint. So there we go. That was that one. So let us just pause for a sec. So this is an ongoing diorama. This is not a finished one, and there's not a huge amount of it left. So it's a Revenge of the Sith diorama. There's a competition at Solihull Scale Model Club for from screen to scene or something. And I'd actually printed this last year, but I didn't do anything else to it, so they've let me do it this year. I think I reprinted it. I printed it last year and then started again this year. So it was only just before Christmas that I'd reprinted it. So anyway, I'm finishing this off. It's a Revenge of the Sith diorama, and the model are from Hokusa, HOK-USA, and he's actually Finnish, and he's does some lovely models, and he did the arena ones, so these were really good. I really like them. So basically this is a basically this battle of the two, and all I have done is I joined the Electrostaff. I took out the lightsaber from Obi-Wan Kenobi's hand and I put on the Electrostaff instead, so that it's part of the scene where they're both grappling the Electrostaff. So yeah. So this is the reprint. I printed it in clear to start with, and it had really bad support markings on the bottom. So this got reprinted just before Christmas, really. And this is almost like overly close up, isn't it? This one. This was zoom as you might expect it, but actually sometimes it's then out of frame, I think. So Ed says the bad habit is using it too often. It looks great on some models, but other models will suit other techniques, different colours, washes or no washes. It's very true. We do all like to have our favourite techniques, but sometimes you do need to try something else. So Norm thinks the shine enhances the leather clothing. Yeah, I don't think it adds much to the tunic is the trouble. But yeah, it means that if you light things well, you get all the highlights you need without painting them. So there we go. But yeah, I think he does, definitely some of it looks very leathery now, where it looked more clothy before. And I put it on mostly because the top looks shiny, but the legs look quite matte, whereas now it all looks shiny, so it all looks matching. So I don't really have a great matte lacquer, and I don't really like spraying acrylic varnishes because they clog up the airbrush like nothing. Even lacquered ones just seem to clog as well. So this is going to get painted in several pieces, and I'm looking at it thinking, that piece there in the middle, that's interesting. I don't remember repainting that in its colour. I wonder where it is. Anyway, I wonder if I painted it the beige or if I missed it. Anyway, I will look for that before I go to bed. So this is me trying to find how it all goes together, just to make sure I get it right. And I haven't, so oh, maybe I glued it on. Yeah, I think I might have glued it on by the look of it. So before I did anything, I wanted to glue some of it together to make it easier, but I decided not to glue the face on or the arms until I had the diorama done, and that means not the shoulder plates either. Because one of the problems with it is that you kind of can't do the faces until you've got the scene put together, but everything's in pieces. So I definitely left quite a lot of Grievous in pieces. Kenobi's almost all put together just because that's how the model was. And all I'd done was delete the lightsaber and put the Electrostaff in his hand instead. So Grievous is the one that's going to have to turn his head to look. So that's what's going to be happening. He's going to be doing that, I think, probably in the diorama. I was originally going to do this on a base with some clones running, and I'm sure I had some clones out ready to, I don't know, I put them away or painted them or whatever, and I didn't actually paint this the colours I expected to. I just picked 2 of these out in the end, but these are the colours I picked out for it. And yeah, they sat in a box for several months before I actually did start doing this. So this is mostly just airbrushing so far. Oh yeah, I think that video is going to get removed. I'm not quite sure why it's in there. So this is me painting black. It's a black primer. So these pieces are metallic. I have painted them a black primer. Then I painted them a black gloss. Not all of it, just actually only some of it's metallic, so I didn't paint all of it metallic. And it's not heavily metallicized. I think I actually need to go through and add maybe a bit more, maybe with a speed paint or something to get a slightly more weathered look. We'll see. So they got painted with that. Then they got a Duraluminium by All Clad. Their black gloss was All Clad as well. And then finally they got an aqua gloss from All Clad, which is really good at settling it and not dulling the shine. I actually have a separate airbrush I use for acrylics. So I spray with my newer, better, it's the same model actually, but it's just less battered. With my newer airbrush, I tend to spray the sort of lacquers. And with my older one, which is just as good, but just slightly older, I tend to just have that one for acrylics. I think I might have left, it's gone down to the brass on the inside of the cup, so I don't know how I ever did that. I must have left it with something that wasn't very nice in there for a while. So here we go. So that's what you're seeing here. So Ed says, I have some misprinted models for my sister. I'm going to glue them on in a heat with rocks and sand, and it will probably dry brush them grey over blue-green to make some broken statues easy, heavy terrain. That sounds good. I've got 2 massive broken lap pieces that I'm going to use. They were I've sliced them with lychee and printed them, and then discovered that you can't slice Darkfire Designs with lychee because lychee just puts rubbish in. It puts supports going through the model. I don't know what it does, but it butchers them because they're originally done in Chitterbox. So I've actually now moved to Chitterbox to support because I print so much Darkfire. And as a result, most of my stuff is in Chitterbox. Yeah, but I had these 2 damaged lats, which are really badly damaged. One of them fell off and didn't print the bottom bit of it, so it's got a nice dent in it, and one of them's got all this stuff, weird support stuff and holes and all sorts of weird things. So yeah. So Ida says, I'm just taking baby back to the hobby. Was always into painting, mostly figurines for friends' war games and a layout in the distant past. But this video, my problem is picking something obscure. Yeah. I like doing movie scenes sometimes just for the fun of it. But actually someone else wanted to do this and I said I'd do it with them. So that's where this came along. I'd kind of got the model, but it came up a lot in sort of the sort of to-do list to do it with someone else, and so yeah, it will get done. So for this, I decided to try and get as much as I could painted on Boga of the colours from the offset. So these are actually the black and white prime coats going on when I did all the other Mandos, I think. Then there was a bit of a gap, and I came back and I painted everything with some more primers in the better colours or in finish coats. So I used beige for Grievous. I can't remember whether I remember to paint his arm though. I know what the beige is, and I have a funny feeling I can't remember whether I painted his arm. I may have to go back and paint just his one arm. We'll have to see whether I remembered it if we keep an eye on these videos. Because when I came to do this, I can't remember if I actually did his arm. Ooh, he's got one arm attached to the extra stuff. And then I painted it with these colours that are just very badly filmed here. This is brown primer going on, just to get everything a little base coat. It makes it easier to put the actual final colour paints on, and maybe even I don't need to. Some of it does look like it needs a bit of a finish with, there's the odd print mark still on like those reins. So it may be I actually sand part of them again anyway. Hi Shrek PMC, nice to have you here. You know, I think it's interesting that it's 51 We've got 4 minutes left. We'll just sneak through. We all remember a couple of months ago where I'd got this on my NAS and it actually took so long to come off the NAS because it had to come through the ether to it that it was running at half speed, and I hadn't noticed because it's all sped up. And we only got halfway through the droids. Anyway, yeah. So I've mentioned a number of times that I prefer spraying lacquers. I need to mention I love spraying lacquers because they don't clog my airbrush in the same way. I think they're smoother. I think they go on nicer. I've got a great range of colours from Mr. Colour. I can thin them consistently. Everything always sprays consistently. I mix up the whole bottle, so I've got loads of on hand ready to do just 1 or 2 drops. Really, really happy. Oh, I did do the arm. Hallelujah. Look, the arm's beige. Really, really happy with that technique. But you do need a full face mask, proper organic solvents, respiratory rated. And you do also need to be very careful about where you do it in your house. You need external ventilation. This is in a separate room that I keep all the doors shut. It's actually next to my kitchen. It's the utility. But it vents externally. I have a room vent. I have this bench vent. And I actually just have a vent to the side that picks up an awful lot of stuff that comes as overspray, which was a giant one I had for when I had my upstairs layout, and it sucked out. So it was just a giant inline vent, and I've put a bit of a filter, a 3D print sort of grill and a filter over the end, and it just sucks through that, and it always sucks a huge amount out of the atmosphere. So yeah, and because my kitchen has French doors, I can open that to the outside if I want, or I can put the cooker hood on if it does start smelling in there. To be fair, a normal door will keep most of it out. And I don't then sit in the kitchen now, so I'm only in there a little bit, and I'm in a different room, so I keep all the doors shut in between. So it is important that you do make sure that you always worry about your health when you're doing this. I'm wearing gloves because I'm handling it, and there's lacquers, and my left-hand glove will normally get quite dirty. Every now and then I forget and think, oops. But, you know, if you're doing them on sticks like I was earlier, it's less of a problem than if you're doing something like that where you're holding it. So, yeah, be careful. So this has got some greens. I actually didn't spend a lot of time looking what colour Boga was. In my head, she's going to have a brown wash underneath to bring the details underneath out. She's got a bit of pink in her mouth. And then the top, which I ended up doing in spearmint. I meant to do it in more of a teal, I think, because I had the teal there. But when I pulled the colours out, I did the spearmint, which you can see here. I'm going to use I'm actually going to use speed paints around the bottom. So I only want this for the tips anyway. So this is going to be, it's spray painted, as you can see, as much as I possibly could. So there's a spearmint, and it's going slightly over the sort of all the skin as well. And then the spikes are going to have a purplish hint around the bottom. Regardless of what they're like in the movie, that's how I'm painting them. If I look at the movie again and decide it should actually be a darker green, I could do a darker green around the bottom with a speed paint as well. We'll have to see. But it'll be a speed paint because it's a very saturated wash, and I want her to have quite bright colours. So yeah, she did end up with a lot of this going over. Ed, but then you miss out on the taste. I can live with that. I can live with that. Jeffy says, what needle size do you use? Well, it's an Iwata Eclipse HPCS, and to be honest, I think it only comes in one needle size. I put it further away and pull the needle back a long way if I want to spray big areas, and I come really close and hardly pull the needle back at all if I want to spray fine areas. There isn't a needle size sort of that I found. I went and looked actually because someone had asked me this before, and I went and looked online and I couldn't even find that you could get a different type of needle. So yeah. Yeah. So, but if you buy an Iwata Eclipse, this is the size it comes with. So Ed says you're going to be sad with the answer, whichever size it came with. I can see you know the answer to that one as well. So yeah, it's just whatever. Sorry. So there we go. That is the end of the video. Woohoo! So with only a couple of minutes to spare. So that's what I've been doing. I wanted to get the Revenge of the Sith diorama done in time for, when is it? April 22nd or something, when the original one was released. I'm looking at the date now going? It's the 13th of April. That's like 9 days. The chances of me finishing that diorama in April is slim. But this is the 20th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith, so I'm going to presume it came to the UK later, because it always comes to the UK later, probably 6 months later. So I'm just gonna get it done some point this year. It is the next thing I'm going to be doing. I am also on my to-do list. I need to do all my droids. I've got 3 droids to do. I need to do the Trailblazer, which is on its final sanding pass before painting, but I have to just adjust the fit on the interior at the moment. So that's what I'm doing, because it's not totally straight. So yeah, and I'm just also doing Kickstarters. So just a reminder, these are my this is the 1x1s. I've obviously got, so it's 3" by 3" when I say 1x1. There's a 2x2, a 2x1, a 3x1, a 2x3, and a 3x3. So you can get these in different sizes with, big ones, and they're all in the other room, just sitting there. And they've been test printed by my print testers, but they'll soon be getting this lot to test as well if they want. So thanks, John and Doug, if you make it to the live stream, which I didn't think you were going to, but anyway. So yeah, so thanks everybody. I can see I just saying appreciate the chat lots. Thank you. Norm says well timed. Whew. It's better than me looking utterly surprised it's 10:05 like I did. And Stephen says hard to believe 20 years. Well, I don't think I saw, I'm going to admit, I think I've only ever seen the sequels at the cinema. I'm not sure I went to watch the prequels at the cinema. I wasn't necessarily cinema going for many years of my life. It was less common. And I don't remember going to see the prequels, whether I did or didn't. But we did go and watch The Phantom Menace last year at the cinema on the re-release. And that was 25 years. But I've not noticed that they're doing Revenge of the Sith, because actually our local cinema's just done Star Wars Sundays. So it's had all of them on a Sunday afternoon, which, I'm always working, so fine. But yeah, but it is hard. So Digger says, great stream, Kathy, very enjoyable. Well, thank you, Digger, Norm and Timber for coming along, moderating you guys in case you got out of line. Though, to be honest, we don't seem to have the problems we did. I think we've got slightly fewer viewers with the chatbots, and nobody's made any rude comments, so that's been good. Thanks, Dating and Ed. I've only seen one Star Wars film in the cinema. I'm sure I saw all the sequels in the cinema, because that was in my cinema going era. But back in my early 20s, I didn't have time to go to the cinema. I just didn't do it at all. And actually, 20 years ago wasn't my early 20s, so let's not kid anyone. So there we go. Yeah, some things you do go, and some things you don't. So Jeffrey. So Ed's saying he saw quite a few of the big classics, but Star Wars, just the one. Yep. Jeffrey Cooper, look forward to the next stream. Keep up the good work with the random needle. Thank you. And Stephen says, good night. Take care. Thanks for taking the time out. Well, thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate it. And it's always fun to actually show what I've been modelling. And yeah, it's great. Thank you all for your support. And I'll let you know when some photos of the Kickstarters are going to be coming out. See you next time. Thanks all for listening, and